So welcome everyone and thank you again for joining. Delighted to be here hosting. So I'm going to kick off now talking a little bit about why we're here because most people wait until things are super unmanageable or until we hit that rock bottom before we stop. That permission to pause is something that's a hot topic that's debated quite a lot in this area. Why is it that we're hardwired to have this kind of association that we can only rest when we deserve it, or we can only stop once we've run out of energy and run out of steam? So I don't want this to be another well-being kind of talk. I want it to be really about performance, about thinking about your energy and how we can sustain a certain level of performance, be that high performance or whatever you want to call it, but over the long term to generate the success you want personally in your life, but also from a standard of what you want to deliver in the workplace. And remember, burnout isn't a personal flaw. Burnout is something that happens through the way that we're wired, from the neuroscience behind how we respond to stress. And that's the good news with that is that we actually can really rewire our approach to it and pick up things a little bit earlier on. So you'll hear me talk about REWIRE quite a lot, and you'll see here on the screen an overview of the framework. So everything I teach and everything we do at 50/50 sits under these sort of 6 neuroscience-based pillars. And they're designed to help you perform sustainably under high levels of pressure over a sustained period of time. So we work with companies like Virgin Media O2, Octopus, Triple Point, Guinness Global Investors, YMU, Trip Drinks. So everything from sort of big household names to your kind of really fast-paced, high-growth scale-ups. Mergers, acquisitions, change, they're all energy suckers sometimes from the organisation. They can bring a tremendous amount of opportunity and change. But with that can come uncertainty, frustration, pressure, the unknown, and lots of things can then lead to high periods of stress and burnout. So we're not going to cover the whole framework that you can see here, but we're just going to focus on a few practical tools that we can take away and really use to build out how we might approach working in an environment that has a lot of pressure within it. So if we think about stress, now I always refer to stress, and when I'm talking to teams and when I'm talking to leaders, or it might be founders of businesses, the message is the same. We've all got a stress scale, okay? So we've all got a space between 0 and 10 where we are, I guess what the word is, dynamically moving day to day, and no 2 days will ever be the same. But we're not in a place where we are probably every single day thinking about where do I sit on the stress scale. But that's what I want you to get into the habit of. I want you to really think about where am I on the stress scale. So thinking about 0 to 10, and anywhere between 3 and 7 would be your healthy stress zone. And that would be where we would ideally, day to day, want to be. Now, 8, 9, 10 out of 10 obviously leads us higher up the stress scale. So this is where we would experience, if we were to stay there a long time, we would experience high periods of stress for a long time. That can lead to chronic stress. At the other end of the spectrum, 0 to 2, we're in a space where actually it is its own form of burnout, because that undermotivated, that sort of almost lack of stimulation, that lack of get up and go or energy to get up and do what it is that you do day to day, that can really, lead us into a space of what we call worn out burnout, what we call bore out. So that whole literally uninterested, unmotivated there. So we don't want to be hanging out 0 to 2 either. Equally, if we go beyond 10, this is where the burnout will kick in. So we don't want to be in a place where we're in this chronic high stress. We want to be able to bounce back, recalibrate, and bring ourselves back into a space where we're able to recharge, re-energize, and move back in. Now, I'm like you. We all have periods of high stress. Now, high stress can come in many guises, from a financial, from a work, from a personal perspective. When we have those moments of high pressure and high stress, if we are not able to handle those, and we don't have decompression mechanisms, and we don't have tools and strategies in place, we will just start to compound, and we will end up spending more time in that chronic stress space. Burnout is like the fall off the cliff. It's like when you've gone too far beyond 10 that you just fall down, and it's effectively what we refer to as the fall. And when I think, when I want you to think about burnout in its own right, it isn't always something that is a big dramatic shift in who we are and what we're doing. Often, burnout can really be masked. It can be masked from a neurodivergent standpoint. It can be masked from a high-performing standpoint. And if we're in habitual, high-stress routines and exhibiting behaviours of getting it all done and pushing it through, we're likely to be experiencing a type of burnout that we would refer to as that more frenetic burnout, which is what the media talks a lot about. That's the very popular view, where we just push to get through until we can't anymore. So we've got bore out at one end of the stress scale, and we've got, that frenetic burnout at the other end. We also have a third type of burnout, and that type of burnout is something that we refer to as worn out burnout or moral injury burnout. Now, this is probably what I experienced when I was in corporate all those years ago, pre-50/50 and pre-moving into the coaching world. It's when you really don't feel an alignment from the values that you hold personally and the work that you're doing day to day. So it often happens to people that are in altruistic roles or doing jobs that kind of really where you're really thinking about the people and the experience. And when we're in a space of misalignment from a value standpoint, that burnout can really kick in and lead us into quite a distressing state of affairs. So here on this scale here, whilst this isn't numbered 1 to 10, what I want to sort of highlight is that stress isn't binary, it is a spectrum. You can see here we're moving between calm, pressure, strain before we get to burnout. So we want some pressure. We know that we need some pressure in order to be healthy, to have that kind of focus to deliver and to get up and feel energized every day. But it's that tip into strain when we need to be mindful, because that's the reset we can have before we hit that space of burnout, which isn't necessarily a place of no return, but it's definitely harder to move ourselves backward for a number of reasons. And that leads me on to talking a little bit about how we look at this from a performance pressure standpoint. So you'll be familiar with this perhaps. This is your performance pressure curve. And what is really important here is just to recognise that here's the scale that I'm referring to. We can recognise that optimal performance place. We know that that top of the bell curve is where we want to be. We understand there's diminishing returns over time. But this is where I want you to think about, where do I sit on the curve? Where am I right now? Where do I tend to get to if I've ignored a couple of my red flags? Because your red flags will be really different to my red flags. And what we do with our default stress response, how we cope and handle high periods of stress, that really will determine how well we cope. And I'll come on to that in a bit. But it's really good to be thinking, okay, where am I on this scale? Am I really low and in potentially a place of bore out? Am I teetering on the edge? Am I hanging out all the time on an 8, 9 or 10? And have I created this habitual burnout cycle where I don't quite tip over the edge? But my new norm, rather than being a 7, is like a 9. So therefore I am pushing and pushing and pushing to the place where I don't have much room or margin for error. So that one sweeping curveball that comes in, that one unexpected issue, and we're kind of swept off our feet into a place of burnout. And that's really what we want to avoid, especially within the workplace. One of the things that we talk about with burnout is whether it's a workplace only phenomenon. And according to the World Health Organization, that would be the view. I think there's still a lot of work to be done around the definitions and how we go about diagnosing burnout. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not here to diagnose or medically treat. However, burnout in its own right is something with understanding and with training is highly coachable to support someone. So if we're in a space where it's about building that awareness, like tonight, that's where we can really add value from the power of coaching. But we have to be very careful because a lot of coaches who might not have had the training will tend to sort of lean into that tendency to push you up the performance curve. So, where you're not normally worried about doing that, if you're not in a burnout state, if you're in a burnout state but masking it really well and you're pushed up that performance scale, that's going to be quite damaging to you as an individual. And there's a neuroscience kind of backdrop to this, which isn't for tonight, but it really gives you a kind of a clear understanding of why we can't think ourselves out of burnout. And it's to do with the way that the brain works when we're in sort of this high pressure, high stress environment. We shut down the intellectual brain, we move into a place of survival. We're not able to think rationally, to be objective, to use our creativity, to overcome problems, to think in a way that's innovative. All of that ability within us as leaders, as people, as professionals, that's kind of wiped out the minute, it's like it goes offline, that part of the brain. And then we step into the more primitive brain where we don't really have space to do anything other than deal with that fight, flight, freeze response within the part of the brain that makes it all about safety. So, of course, the brain, if we've been consistently showing the brain that in order to succeed and to push through, I have to keep going. And if that's the way that I'm conditioning my own behavior, then of course to stop would feel quite alien. And the neuroscience behind us tells us to keep going. And the reality is it can't distinguish now between the threat of a lion eating us, like it would have done in the cave times, caveman era, and a new email coming in, which is just that one email too many when you've got so much on your plate. So a little window into that, but just really be conscious about where you are on the curve and that kind of dynamic blended zone of moving from calm straight through up the spectrum to burnout. When it comes to some of the signs and symptoms, you might be familiar with it, but there can be so many signs and symptoms of burnout. So this one here around this mental distancing, as you'll see on the screen, this is really, really important to recognize. I do sort of see it as the biggest one being that loss of sense of self. You often find people in a space of burnout who might be really like looking back on photos of themselves and not recognizing who they are anymore. They haven't really got much more energy to give, but they wouldn't really be in a place of being able to acknowledge it. Because in this moment, and if I'm speaking to you right now as someone who feels that they're experiencing burnout, you yourself might be sat going, I don't have much more in my tank. I don't know how much more I can give. It can feel quite bleak when we're in that space. And there comes the cynicism. There comes the kind of distancing from a kind of social standpoint as well. We retreat, we step back, but we're probably ploughing on with the work. And depending on the style of burnout that you're experiencing, it's important to recognize some of these signs and symptoms in ourselves or in others when we're going through this journey. So the signs and symptoms might include physical signs and symptoms. So we might have that tight neck or the shoulders here where we tend to carry stress, pounding headaches. We might have gut issues and stomach issues as the second brain, and the stress can really kick. And when we move into fight or flight or freeze mode, our body literally will eject everything that we have within the body and within the system in order for us to be the lightest possible version of ourselves to escape danger. And that's why we call our gut the second brain in those instances, because we are, priming ourselves for survival and often escape. Now, when it comes to a working context, there's a real addiction to work that shows up. So that inability to shut down the laptop, the forever turning over the phone all the time, thinking non-stop about work, waking up at 3 a.m. Because one of the other things is the first thing to go when you are entering periods of high stress is your sleep. And you'll be well aware of that. All of us have experienced, no doubt, times in our lives where we no longer have that wonderful, peaceful night of sleep because actually we've got the gremlin in our head waking us up, with worries and frets about the day ahead or about the day that we've just experienced. And as sleep is the key way to kind of download the day and the only processing that we have from the body to and the brain to sort of decompress and move through the happenings of the day. To lose the sleep is actually quite challenging. So some other symptoms can even go as far as changes around sort of allergies and intolerances. Chronic conditions can stem from it. I know a number of people have experienced a lot of pain and injury along the way through chronic illnesses. We have a lot of the kind of typical, what you might say, high performer behaviors. So, cracking on and doing the work and getting it done, and always give the work to a busy person because they can do it. And this is where we have to look out for signs and symptoms too. So just that sort of awareness around what is that person's bandwidth, their cognitive bandwidth, how much are they taking on, how much am I taking on if it's about me, and is this realistic? And when I'm asking, when you're asking someone about, taking a break, for some of the neuroscience reasons that I've explained, the brain doesn't see that as a very safe thing to do. So of course we keep going even more, especially with this frenetic burnout. We'll keep pushing to a place where actually we're not willing to say, yeah, I need to stop, because actually we can't see we need to stop. And often that awareness comes after the fall. Because it's very hard when we're in it to recognize it, but it's much easier to know our red flags, recognize when we're veering off course, and to pull ourselves back. I've often talked about the concept of flirting with burnout. So you're kind of constantly there on the edge or in this habitual cycle, not ever reaching that full-blown crash and burn, but being in awareness where we're able to pull ourselves back. And that's so much more valuable than waiting and ignoring and burying our heads in the sand until the moment comes when maybe you can't pour that glass of water, or you're walking up the stairs and you can no longer take the next step, or you kind of fall down because you're so exhausted. And that is obviously what we want to not be happening. So when we talk about energy, and I use a lot of the work that I do is around sustainable high performance. So we talk a lot around the hacks of productivity and how we can actually optimize performance within the workplace. And we talk obviously about boundaries, but we also talk about energy management over time management. And I think that's really important when it comes to stress management too. So of course, boundaries aren't selfish, but they are very strategic, and we have to see energy as the currency of performance. McKinsey found in a study that they did that leaders who treated their recovery like it was, formal kind of meetings, or saw it in the same way that they would protect revenue, and actually built that into their diary and built that into their weekly agendas, and they actively planned for recovery, saw sort of 10 to 15% higher performance than their peers who didn't do that. So this whole concept of building in recovery time, we know it works for the elite athletes. We know it works for people that are doing very high intense jobs like bomb disposal or working for NASA, whatever it might be. We have to forcibly put recovery in to the journey. And I think that concept is really important to think about. So ask yourself, what's the context like that I'm creating as a leader for my team? Who are they able to come and say to me if they're struggling? Am I, as a leader or as a member of a team, able to go and share if I'm not able to cope? Because that psychological safety around creating the right context is how we're able to thrive as individuals and as teams. So the part to remember here is, think about the psychological safety and the context. The analogy I love to use is you can't grow a mango tree in Iceland. And if our context is Icelandic, we're just not going to get there as an individual, as a team. But also, please reframe the concept that rest or recovery means doing nothing. There is such a big association that those two things mean stepping away. And it might mean stepping away from the intricacy of your specific task, but it can be very active in nature, and it could be doing something else, work focused, but with a slightly different angle. It might be not adding something into the diary, but just shifting up the way we do it. So whether that's doing it outside with some fresh air and maybe the sun when it's out, to get on our face for half an hour, that's brilliant for our mental well-being. It might be about taking a walkie-talkie call rather than taking it on Zoom. It might be using the Pomodoro technique to take regular breaks just to get the body moving when we're stuck in an office or a home office 24/7 and it feels quite overwhelming with the amount of time we're stagnant. So protect your energy like it's a strategic asset, because this is your competitive advantage. And we also need to, another level that we would go into if we were doing more, more, I guess, in-depth training with teams, would be to really plot your energy levels over the course of the day to recognize when your high level is and make sure you're associating the work with your high bursts of energy across the day. And that would include looking at things like the impact and control matrix, and thinking about where we spend our time and how we spend our energy, more to the point. So yeah, energy is the performance of it's the currency of performance. There we go. So how do we spot stress before it's too late? So we know that we need to think about our own red flags, and I would be really encouraging you to not, jot them down. We all have different tells, as if we're playing a game of poker. Some people will start to be more snappy, be more brittle. Others might, start doing things that they're not actually that proud of. Like they might start, being a bit more messy or hanging around and watching a bit more TV because they're just so exhausted they haven't got the headspace. They might not be going out anymore. And none of these are right or wrong, by the way. Some are better than others, but they're just different based on the different human personalities that we have. Some people might retreat into their shell and not go out at all with friends, will screen calls and won't take them, won't be proactive in outreach with friends or colleagues. And the list can go on. Some of the ones that are most popular are that kind of brittleness, and are you ready to cry when you've lost your phone charger? I think I put on my LinkedIn post this morning. Or that last email that comes through that sends you off the edge is a really good sign there that you've missed some of your red flags, because to get to that point we're already at a capacity. And that's where this stress bucket analogy comes in really beautifully, because it gives us a real visual on this. And I love this, and I'm in partnership with the creative psychotherapist here, so I always love her work. She does such a good job in bringing, I think, it to life. Don't you think? It's just so good. And what I want to share with you is just how visual it is to get this message across to yourself and to others, that we have a certain capacity for stress, and all of that is conditioned around what we've been exposed to as kids, how we've grown up, what our DNA is, what we've kind of gone through from a work standpoint, where we are right now in our lives with the kind of context within which we're operating. So all of us have a different sized bucket, if you wish. And every single day we'll have lots of stressors that will fill the bucket with little drops of water. So anything from deciding what we're having for breakfast or navigating the school run, all of those will bring little, droplets into, or sometimes big droplets, depending on what we've got going on. And then we have the big life stuff going on, like politics, like what's going on with that big presentation, or the fact that you've got a big meeting with your team today. These things add larger drops into our bucket. And then we've got the stuff that's going on outside in our own personal lives. We might have something going on with our partner or our children. There might be unresolved tension or arguments that are kind of sitting heavy with us. Whatever that might be, these will fill up the bucket. Now, when we're coping well, we need to acknowledge that we're sleeping well, and that's the first thing. We're likely to be really active. We're probably going and exercising, very much likely to be moving our body, walking, going to the gym, whatever it might look like, playing team sports. Usually we feel very aligned from a value standpoint, and if we don't receive that from work, because not everybody will do, we're finding ways to fill that outside of work through community work, volunteering, just doing things that really set the value level alight. That connection piece is also super important to cope, and a really good tell that somebody is, very kind of mentally fit and healthy in their life. If they're well connected and they're hanging out, it's not always the go-to, but it's a really good sign that someone's using that as a great way to cope with stress, because getting out and talking to people and being around others is a really, really big thing for our well-being. So what tends to happen, however, is we don't do a lot of that. we let that slide. It's the first thing to go when the stress hits the fan. And yeah, we're in this space where we've got a lot of water filling up in our bucket day in, day out. And what we tend to do is, slip into unhelpful coping mechanisms. So we might be more likely to take risk, and sort of take risky, take risk into the day job or into our home lives as well. Likely to do over exercising or overeating or over drinking. We're kind of stepping into that space where we're more likely to be numbing the feelings and escaping from the reality rather than facing them head on. Because often it can be too overwhelming or too stressful to do that. So we tend to just bury our head in the sand. And what this picture is showing is it's like putting a little hose pipe on the end of the tap, which is doing its best to get rid of some of the stress, but then you're just filling it back up straight away. And that kind of can lead into bigger things and more stressful things such as self-harm or alcohol and drugs. These are big things that can be used and people do use, and maybe you've done before, to cope with stress. And it's a really big sign to be aware of and thinking about, where am I with my bucket? Is it overflowing? Can I find some healthy ways to cope? And on top of what we've got going on day to day, we also have the trauma trigger tap. So that will be from experiences with other people. We might have memories that are evoked from our conversations. There might be some shame or guilt that comes to the surface based on what we're listening to, hearing, seeing, experiencing. And when that tap comes on, it's kind of adding more and more water into our mix. And I've got another analogy here. I've got my glass here. It's gone. I sometimes use a glass with all different post-it notes in it, and it kind of overflows. Just you can sort of like name your stressors and put them in, and quite quickly you can see how the stressors turn into stress, and the stress then can kind of overwhelm us into that space as well. So definitely something to be conscious of. And another thing I wanted to share with you is as I shared before, that when we get to a place of that stress where it's all beginning to tip from being a comfortable, healthy zone into a space where it's not. There's three quick checkpoints that I use with the teams that I coach. And you can almost think of these as your like early warning radar that might go off, that kind of smoke alarm, if you want that analogy. So it's the three B's. So first of all, start with your body. So you want to be noticing what your body's telling you. Remember that stress manifests physically as well as mentally. So your body will tell you some signs before your brain catches up. So have you got that tightness in your shoulders? Are you breathing from your chest rather from your diaphragm? Do you notice your chest area is moving up and down as opposed to your belly? Your belly should be the area that's moving when you breathe. Are you feeling tension in your jaw? Are you clenching your fists? These are really your first data points, and these should be things that you start to think, okay, I need to check in on this. Second B is behavior. So I want you to spot that shift in how you're showing up. So are you snapping faster? Are you being really brittle and being quite nasty in your responses? Do you hear yourself and think, oh God, why did I say it like that? Do you say yes when you actually mean no? It's another really big one. Are you in a place where your ability to focus is really dwindling? So that's struggling to focus on one thing. Usually that's you stepping into strain outside of pressure. So you're moving through and up towards burnout. And then we want to think about bandwidth. So we've done the body check, the behavior check. Now we need to do the bandwidth check. So we want to think about, what mental tabs have you got opened up? Think about this from your cognitive bandwidth. Where are you spending your time reacting, or firefighting is a common term we use in, when it comes to managing the day-to-day doing? And where are you spending more time sort of in that reactivity space rather than responding and thinking clearly? Are you in a space where everything is urgent? Remember, somebody else's urgency isn't your emergency, and it's really important to have that clarity around it. Somebody slacks you and tells you they want you to do something, or emails you and then comes back to you within half an hour and says, did you get my email? This is where boundaries become really important. I think we've all been there and experienced that. But we want to be in a space where recognizing if we are feeling that everything is urgent and I've got to do it all, and you hear yourself saying, I can't take a break. I just physically can't. I've got to do this and I've got to get through it. You've got to listen back to that and remind yourself, right, okay, I'm at overload. I've got too many tabs open in my brain. Literally, which ones can I close? Because if I can't, I am going to combust. And that is genuinely what will happen. We will just get to a place where we'll just probably, it will be different for everyone else than it probably is. But for me, it'll be like, oh, I just can't do it anymore. Okay. It's a physical stop. It's a mental stop because it's like the cogs have slowed. But for me, it'll be like, right, I have to now, because if I don't, I'll get ill. So once you notice your body, your behavior, your bandwidth, you kind of got a cue here to do like a little bit of a micro reset along the way. Again, we're always thinking preventatively here at 50/50. What can we do to avoid? So you can just literally take a breath, recognize, right, too many tabs open, body's hurting, I'm always on and I'm always urgent. If whatever one it is, if it's all three, then you definitely need to listen. But whatever one it is, then just take a breath, and then you just want to move away. You want to shift your state, and you want to get out of the zone where you're in. And you want to just get some movement and fresh air. You want to give yourself 10 minutes at the very least, ideally 20 minutes. And then you want to come back and brainstorm, what can I close down? What can I do differently? Where is my stress stemming from? Because that's what you want to get to the root cause of. Okay, actually, it's all coming down to the fact that I've got this big thing going on outside, of work, or it's actually this particular proposal I'm working on, or I've got this big leadership meeting where I'm presenting. Whatever it is, peel it back, and then you can kind of take the layers off to work backwards to move forwards. So it's not always about grand gestures. We are talking catching yourself before you fall, protecting focus, and we don't want your brain to be burning through all your energy, as it does use most of our energy day to day. We don't want it to be burning through it too quick and leaving us without any charge for the rest of the day. So one more tool for you, just a quick time check. We've got a little bit of time. One more tool for you is really helpful as well. This is the 90-second reset. So this is an American neuroscientist who came up with this, absolutely brilliant. So you'll see how to do it here, but I'll just give you a bit of background. So how it works is you've got your initial trigger, and that will be the fact that you've got an external event to you, or a thought that you have will trigger a stress response in your brain. So whether you think it or whether something happens to you, you've got a stress moment and you're trying to get through that. Now, this is absolutely mind-blowing when you hear this, and if you've heard it already, you'll know what I mean. The brain releases a surge of chemicals, and this comes from a part of the brain which is very much impacted by the stress. Obviously, this is like the cortisol, this is the noradrenaline, and it causes an actual physical reaction. But that reaction, you'll be thinking, well, what's that? It will be the increased heart rate, the spike in the blood pressure, the flushing of the skin, the shortness of the breath. This is all the physical reactions to that particular triggered moment of stress, but it only lasts for 90 seconds. Now, this is the mind-blowing bit, and it's a big part of my coaching journey with clients, is to recognize the distinction between thoughts and thinking. They are completely two different things. And that's a conversation for another day. Ask me if you want to hear more. But because the stress response takes 90 seconds for the chemicals to flood and wash through the body, if we're continuing to feel stressed, it's on us. We are causing that perpetual suffering, because what we're doing is we're replaying the thinking around what's happened as opposed to the actual physiological impact of the stress being relevant in the body anymore. As far as the body's concerned, it's done and dusted. 90 seconds, the chemical response is done and out of the body. It's the brain that holds on to the thinking patterns that keep us in a place of stress that's prolonged. So you have a choice. At the point of this 90 seconds after a stressful moment, you have a choice. We all have a choice. Do you choose to let that emotion pass, Or do you want to continue that emotional loop of replaying that thought? Imagine it like a record on a record player going round and around and around. And if that were to be the case, and you were to be thinking that way, um, you're going to keep yourself in a perpetual state of stress. And the reality is that we can actually take the tips here on the screen to recognize the emotion. I always say, name it to tame it. So, are you feeling frustration? Is it anger? Are you deeply sad? Once you understand what you're feeling, you then need to pause for 90 seconds. Once you've kind of accepted where you are, that pause, there's a power in the pause. And then usually we want to kind of ground in with some breath work. So there's two types I would recommend. One is the box breathing, where you inhale for 4, you hold for 4, you exhale for 4, and you hold for 4. You can also do 5-finger breathing. Really good with kids, this one is, where you breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth, tracing your fingers on the inside. It's actually quite soothing to the palm as well. And another one for a bonus is the physiological sigh. So this would be where you do 2 deep breaths in through the nose, one very deep and then a short, sharp one, but both quite deep. So it would be like this. And then you exhale really long and calmly through your mouth. And always with all the breath work we want to be doing, we want those exhales to be longer than the inhales. Now, what these do is they send a signal to the brain that we are safe, that we are no longer in that kind of threat space, which the brain has picked up on from the stress response and from the chemical reaction. And it makes us in a space where we can kind of remove ourselves from that primitive, kind of, practical safety brain and into a bit more of a logical space and a little bit more pragmatic, but also in our creative strategy, all the brilliant things that the intellectual mind can do. And then we make our conscious choice. But sending that message to the brain first with breath work can really help us get into a place where that conscious choice feels possible to actually move through the stress. So quite a lot there covered in about 40 odd minutes. If you've got any questions, chuck them in. What I've loved to share is that there are so many ways we can rewire and reset through the challenges that we're experiencing. And one of the journeys that we go on with stress is that we think it's all external and we can't control it. Actually, it's very much internal, and we can rewire how we respond to stress, but also how we allow ourselves to tip into stress in the first place. And we can also think about how we can prevent bigger issues such as burnout. So today we have covered loosely the World Health Organization definition of burnout, the fact that it's seen as largely an organizational phenomenon, which does mean we have responsibility as employers to provide tools and resources and training to our employees, but also be mindful that stuff goes on outside of work too, where people might be struggling. And actually, it's quite normal, I think, to have a stress response from outside of work as it is from inside of work too. We've talked about the 3 types of burnout. So we've got the bore out at the lower end of the stress scale. We've got the frenetic burnout and moral injury burnout as 2 distinct types of burnout, but have very similar impact on people. We've recognised that as a tool we can use the stress curve. We can see it as the Yerkes-Dodson bell curve, or we can also see it as just sort of a 0 to 10, easy thinking about it as an elastic band, and bringing ourselves back in to recalibrate. We've talked around the need to focus on energy management and creating some boundaries. We've also covered a couple of tools and hacks, the 3B model that we did earlier to recognise when stress is tipping over the edge, also the 90-second reset, and some deep grounding breath work, which can help signal our brain that we are here in the moment. I've got a question that's come in privately around a boss who is clearly in burnout, and how do you tell them? Well, I think one of the challenges with burnout is when we're in it, it's really hard to see it, and we might recognise it on the run up, but we might not always recognise it when we're in it. It's almost that form of addiction where we're kind of so engrossed and immersed in it, we can't see the wood for the trees. something that can work really well is something that we refer to as breadcrumbing. So you can't just say to somebody who is likely in a burnout space for the neuroscience reasons that I've explained that you need to stop, because what they're going to say, they're going to say that they can't stop, and actually they might see that as, am I failing? It's hard when there's a different dynamic around, um, what's the word, I guess, pay grade, or responsibility or seniority within the workplace as well, because there's that to be navigated. But breadcrumbing around kind of just sharing information as opposed to directly telling someone they need to stop, whatever way round it is, can work very well. So you might want to be recommending podcasts or saying, oh, I went to this really interesting masterclass the other night. Have you ever been to anything like that? Where you kind of like dropping little breadcrumbs along the road for them to pick up, but not necessarily telling them, because what we don't want to do is push someone into place when they're already on that brink, or they've already hit a burnout really, and they're just one or two steps away from the fall, to end up not stopping and pushing that bit further, which we don't want them to do. So, yeah. Well, we are now finished. So thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate your time, and yeah, I hope you found it useful. I've got one more slide to show around next steps. So I'd love you to share some feedback with me. There's a QR code there that you can scan. So please do that. I would love to hear your feedback and thoughts. It will help me shape the next masterclass that I run. And I'm getting into a habit of doing these quite regularly now, as you'll see. Please make sure we're connected on LinkedIn, because you'll always get my updates and posts. And I regularly switch the topics around as well. So there should usually be some sort of fresh content coming out. Also, I'd love to book a call with you if you're looking at this from the standpoint of yourself. I have a lot of group coaching program potential that's coming up in the new year, which could be fantastic for you as an individual, as a leader. It might be something for your workplace, be it around workshops, trainings, or coaching for individuals, leaders, or wider workshops for the business. So please do get in touch. I'd love to talk to you. And for those of you that are watching the recording, hopefully this has resonated as well. And if you have questions, please drop them in an email to me, and I'd love to come back to you and answer them. I'm always, not always available, because that would be always on and not helpful for my boundaries, but I'm always willing to come back to you and to share any insight that I can to help you on your own journeys. So thank you so much, and I'll speak to you again soon.